So, folks, we had a huge full afternoon, and we've got one segment left, which I'm really excited to close out our time. And our other keynote sponsor, Global Prairie, Kirsten Green from Global Prairie. She is Director of Environmental, Social, and Governance Strategy. I'm grateful for your sponsorship, and Kirsten's going to do the honor of introducing our closing keynote.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, hello, everyone. Thank you. I'm Kirsten Green, Director of Environmental, Social, and Governance, ESG Strategy at Global Prairie. Global Prairie is a global marketing firm, and we are a 100% employee-owned certified B Corp. We're really excited by this conference today and look forward to many more in the future with B Corps in our region. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing the Fireside Chat with August M. Ball. August is the CEO and founder of Cream City Conservation, which is a very inspiring Milwaukee-based B Corp. So at this time, I will turn the mic back over to Lisa Giesenbauer, who is moderating the chat.
Thanks, Kirsten. We're going to move to a video here of this fireside chat with August and Lisa. So, Emmanuel?
Hello, my name is Lisa Giesenbauer, and I am the chair of Be Local Wisconsin. I would like to welcome you to a fireside chat with my friend August Marie Ball, the CEO and founder of Cream City Conservation, Wisconsin's first Black-owned certified B Corporation. August, could you talk about what motivates you for starting Cream City Conservation and why the work your team is doing is so needed today?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Lisa, for having me here today. So Cream City Conservation Cream City Conservation is a two-pronged social enterprise, which means that we take the profits from our consulting work that we do with environmental organizations across the globe who want to create practices and policies to help them attract and retain a dynamic and diverse workforce. And we use those proceeds to fund our Cream City Conservation Corps program, which does on-the-boots conservation work right here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on the ancestral lands of the Menominee, Potawatomi, and Oneida people. So helping to essentially serve as a closed-loop system of connecting young people of color, predominantly folks who are hit first and worst by environmental injustice, to make sure that they are included in efforts to protect public green space for generations to come. And the reason why we do this two-prong approach is that it doesn't quite matter if I am getting, hundreds of young people excited about a career in conservation, if their experiences when they walk through the doors of the industry is negative. And I believe that most organizations who, especially those in conservation, are not intentionally, causing harm. The reality is our workforce and the culture of the workplace hasn't quite evolved since the 50s and 60s. And it's also, quite frankly, designed for white middle-class norms. And so if we want different results, we have to start doing different things. So that was the initial impetus for starting Cream City Conservation. But I do want to be clear that Cream City Conservation was started by accident. I can get into that a little bit later.
Which is amazing. I mean, as your friend for a long time, I know that. And I just have to say the work you're doing it's been such an inspiration to me. And I'm so proud of the work that you're doing because it's so needed in Milwaukee. And I feel like when we think about the roles that B Locals are playing and the work that certified B Corps are doing, I mean, to me, you're always such a golden example. So let's unpack that a little bit about how Cream City was founded. I mean, briefly, because we have a lot to cover today.
Sure. So as you know, Lisa, I'm a sociologist like you by training and an educator. So my background is youth work. And prior to starting Cream City Conservation, I worked for a national conservation corps program as their Wisconsin director. And while I loved that job, it was extremely frustrating to go into meeting after meeting and find myself not only being the only woman, but oftentimes the only person of color. And that came with its own bag of challenges. So I felt that I really wanted to do something to make sure that the women, the Black and brown girls that were coming up behind me weren't experiencing the same things that I experienced. That, again, many of them were unintentional, but that's the whole thing about microaggressions, right? Like they're paper cuts that when you get one every few months, it's not the end of the world. But when you're receiving paper cuts multiple times a day, it can have an extremely adverse effect. And I do believe that people, my clients, especially on the consulting side, they genuinely want to do things differently. They just don't have the tools or a roadmap of what changes need to happen. So so Cream City Conservation Corps started as a Band-Aid to the organization that I worked for, leaving Milwaukee and closing down, I guess, not only their Milwaukee chapter, but their Detroit chapter as well. And there weren't any other organizations doing similar work that could address that gap. Specifically with our county parks department here in Milwaukee, at full staffing, they need about 2,000 people. And for the past 10 plus years, they've had roughly, give or take, 200 people doing the same amount of work, which means that our park system, which has received numerous awards and is amazing, especially considering the lack of resources that are allocated for it. There was a huge challenge in making sure our trails were maintained. We're battling emerald ash borer and the impacts of that generations to come will not know ash trees. But also just addressing a lot of the green infrastructure that is so necessary in mitigating the impacts of climate change, which, by the way, people of color have the most firsthand experience navigating, and yet are so rarely at key decision-making tables where, decisions are going to be impacting their communities. They're not often at those tables, and not for lack of trying to be at those tables.
And that's because, again, your work is so important because you are at the table now. And I'm not going to dig into all the amazing appointments you've had in southeastern Wisconsin, being on the Governor's Climate Task Force or the Milwaukee County Task Force. I think those are both great appointments, and they were given to you because of the work you've been doing. But so hopefully things are starting to change because of your work in Milwaukee. I'd like to talk a little bit now about becoming a certified B Corp. Again, I've known you a good long time, and back in 2018, you came to a workshop we had done by BLD, Wisconsin, to help folks get ready to become a certified B Corp. And you and I have talked about this for years, and there were some barriers to you being able to apply. And then last year, a new program came out, I think in the end of 2020, and you applied for it. Could you tell us a little bit more about the Level program and your journey to becoming a certified B Corp?
Well, I mean, frankly, I will forever be indebted to you, Lisa, for informing me about the Level program. When we first met and you introduced me to the concept of certified B Corps, I was actually still working for that organization that no longer functions in the state of Wisconsin. And within that period, I was trying to think about how I could incorporate those principles that are held in high regard and that standardize the expectations for how B Corps function into that nonprofit role that I had. And so then when I began Cream City Conservation, that was very much so front of mind. But because we were a bootstrapped organization as a social enterprise, we do not apply for grant funding. We're not a 501c3, and that's intentional. We don't want to be in competition with other non-for-profits. We want to support their work. But that meant that every dollar we earned needed to go back into the organization, and we just didn't have the funding or the finances rather, to afford to go through that program. So, it's almost kind of like being a janitor at Harvard, where I'm like listening in on the classes and trying to implement learning into my own business. But being able to work with a consultant who specializes in helping companies become certified B Corps allowed for us to actually measure this magic that we knew was happening with our clients, with our core members, but yet we didn't have the processes of which to gather that data. And again, as a sociologist, I love data. We had some data, but we didn't really know how to apply it, right? Having all the materials, but not knowing how to make a cake out of that. And so our consultant that we worked with was Decade Impact, and our Brianna, who was our main consultant on that program, was so patient and understanding that we're a very lean organization. We have 2 full-time staff, which includes me, and a lot of seasonal staff, and a lot of things to contend with, especially during the height of the pandemic. So having that support specifically for an organization like ours with another entity who understood the importance of making sure that we are doing what we set out to do because we believe it's important, and can help us identify ways, like even with our banking, we've changed who we bank with now because of connections and knowledge that was brought forth through the Level program. We get to meet other companies across the nation and in Canada who are like-minded, who believe in the possibility of being able to use business as a force for good. Because so often people think, oh, you're either evil as a company or you're good as a nonprofit. And it was so refreshing to be in community with other founders, other CEOs who started wine companies and cleaning product companies, etc., who also believed in creating positive impact throughout every corner of their business. And I will forever be grateful to that experience.
Okay, and so real quick, so pretend he doesn't know what the Level program is.
Yeah.
Just tell us, like, in a couple.
Absolutely. Sure. So being a part of the Level program means that you are assigned a consultant that helps you work through the B Impact assessment, helps you collect all of the information you need to figure out what your scoring will be within the B Impact assessment. And by the way, anyone can go and start doing the B Impact assessment. They can, so even if you're just beginning and you want to know where you might score, you can do that anytime, which I think is awesome, which I didn't know before joining the Level program. And so that consultant basically worked with us, learned about our business, and helped identify areas that we could score in. And I think it was quite a few months that we worked together, maybe almost a year, actually. But there was also a lot of behind the scenes work that our consultant did to gather our materials to apply to be recognized as a certified B Corp. We now have new policies, as our consultant would say, Brianna, like taking vapor to paper, because Queen City Conservation, was an accident. There were a lot of practices that we were doing that were great, but they didn't live anywhere outside of my head and outside of my coworkers' head. So this was, I hope that's helps explain a bit more.
The only other thing that you haven't shared is that the Level program is for women of color, right?
Sorry,
so
yes.
It's a special program to help make it more equitable for businesses like yourself who are doing amazing work to join the B Corp movement and take out some of those barriers.
Yeah, specifically for, I would say actually for BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, and women, which, by the way, are the companies who receive the least amount of venture capital funding, tend to have the most challenges in terms of acquiring clientele. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't realize, like, women couldn't even get a business loan until the late 80s without a male co-signer. Like, that's bananas. And yet, so yeah, so very much so grateful for B Corp and for the Level program, specifically targeting those with the most need. Which is something I'm extremely grateful for, and can see the impacts of the others who've gone through the program as well, which I think there was, like 6 other companies here went through the pilot
first year, but there's 10 now for this year. Next year, they're going to be doing it again. So I think it's a great program. Okay, so thank you for sharing about Level, and we're so happy to have you as our Wisconsin's first Black woman-owned B Corp. So let's talk a little bit more about what did you learn through becoming the process? I know your phrase is you're able to put magic, show the magic that you're doing, right? But what, besides governance, what other things did you learn through the process that other people could take home with them as something to think about,
I guess in terms of what I learned throughout the program was how we are tracking information is super critical. So it's one thing to say, we're helping to change the face of conservation. It's another to actually track, the hours of education that our core members go through, the hours of education our clients go through, their attrition and retention rates, for example, for folks of color, being able to, these are things we were tracking, but that we didn't know how to communicate that to the world and to other potential stakeholders. Also, how to convey concisely why this work is so important. So, for example, a lot of times I will have clients that will come to me and say, we want a basic diversity training, right? Well, what does that mean? And oftentimes they don't know what that means because there's no such thing, right? So when we get to the pain of like, what's the actual problem that you're trying to solve for, which is what the question that the Level program helped me ask, we realized that for a lot of our clients, that question is, well, how do we attract and retain a workforce that is representative of the communities that we operate within? Because so often when we think about attrition, we're oftentimes just thinking about the person who left, right? Or, oh gosh, we lost them in 3 months. That's 3 months of salary that we're losing. And now we have to bring on someone else. Well, we find out through looking at our assessments in the B-Level program, it's actually not just that time of that one staff person. It's the time of the people who onboarded that staff person, the materials, the setup costs of getting that staff person a uniform, business cards, etc. And now that's all down the drain, right? Not only that, but also the lost productivity within the time frame that employee decided that they weren't going to stay and began looking for another job. That's also a sunk cost. So these are all things that we get to look at, but also looking at governance, looking at how are we sharing power, not only with our clients, but also with our core members. For us, that means having an alumni council. For us, that means our staff holistically, whether it's seasonal or full-time, have a say in who we work with, what projects we do that are pro bono, what projects we do that are fee-for-service. We also formalized our PTO program, where once every month for 8 hours, there are volunteer hours that we pay our core members and our leaders to do. They can choose an issue of their interest that aligns with certain values that we have in our organization. So it really allows us to not only put paper to paper, but also to formalize our values and to strategize. Because again, if we're not normalizing these conversations around equity and inclusion, if we're not operationalizing around them, then again, they just live in August's head, which doesn't really help anyone.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I love that. I love the vaporizing to paper. That's awesome. So you and I are both sociologists, and I know that sometimes we may look at the world a bit differently than our colleagues and friends do, but because we've been trained to understand why people do what they do, and we've been empowered to use our voices to help address social problems and the systems of inequality that exist in the world today. Over the last 2 years, we've seen a rise in activism in all forms, especially tied to climate justice and racial equity. What are you hopeful about regarding the times that we're living in and the opportunities that we now have?
For me, it has to be our young people. Young people get a bad rap. One of the first interview questions I ask our crew meeting staff is, to do their best impression of a teenager. And that impression that they give me of a teenager tells me everything I need to know about what their perspective is on young people, right? Now you can imagine, most often people's interpretation of a teenager is someone who's self-centered, who's not paying attention, who's tired, who's irritable. But it's a person who knows that teenagers, young people, are actually some of the most empathetic, justice-oriented, fairness-oriented people you will ever meet. And that is something to behold and to leverage. So what gives me the most hope is how invested young people are in making sure that we are cultivating a world that is softer, that is kinder, and not in a fuzzy way, but in a we won't survive way unless we change how we're functioning. Like literally, by not eliminating systems of oppression, we all suffer, right? Like this concept of white supremacy culture, it harms white people just as patriarchy harms men, right? Because it limits us. It dilutes us down into one way of how we need to be. I see young people asking really important questions adults sometimes are either afraid to ask or haven't even thought about asking. Like, who benefits from this decision? Who might be unduly burdened by this policy? These are questions that my teenagers are asking. For good example, if I can share, our zero tolerance policy. We have eliminated that zero tolerance policy because of our alumni council member who informed me that, Miss August, we get why you have that rule of a zero tolerance policy, but what that teaches us and other young people is that we can't make mistakes. And you always say that making mistakes is how you learn. You have to have the ability and the freedom to make mistakes. We want to make them fast and cheap as much as possible. But if we're not allowed to make mistakes, we create a culture where we lie. We create a culture where we don't try anything new, certainly, right? And we create a culture that teaches young people and our staff also, regardless of age, that they have to play it safe, and that if they do make a mistake, we will hold that against them forever, which is exactly what keeps people stuck when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? That fear of like, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to do the wrong thing. I don't want to get canceled. That's a very real fear. And until we change the culture that's creating that outcome, we're going to continue to be on this hamster wheel. So,
that's brilliant. And I love it because when we look towards the future, the young people are our future, right? And so I'm so proud of how they're able to have such a positive impact and have a leader in you. So I would like to thank you so much for sharing your insights today with all of us at the Midwest Build. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day.